started in Wildlife Committee. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. We're going to proceed now and talk about a preview of some CWD high risk. I'd like to start off by asking Chuck Yost to come up. He has some things to discuss or present.
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the slight change in the agenda. I am, as a CWD coordinator, going to provide a quick update on CWD and then talk about some next steps for our management efforts, and then invite Jenifer Wisniewski up to talk about some results of an online poll in regards to this subject. And finally, James Kelly will present a proposal or a concept to be considered for hunting regulations for the affected area. So regarding an update, we had another good public meeting recently in Summerville, and Commissioner Gardner made some complimentary comments earlier, and thank you for that. We had about 150 in attendance and really satisfied with how that went. That was a great showing for the agency and a good collective team effort by staff. We also had 15,000 views online of that meeting, which we're certainly proud of, and in conjunction conducted an online poll to try to get a sense for our customers' reactions to the hunting regulation concept that was shared at the public meeting, and then get an assessment of our chronic wasting disease communications and our educational efforts, and then learn about what options exist to try to get hunters to harvest more deer in the affected area. Some other initiatives we've been focused on is weighing the trade-offs of providing statewide sampling to hunters and capitalizing on sampling opportunities through our depredation system. Some other significant items are some things that you saw earlier in this meeting, the development of the Manner and Means Proclamation led by law enforcement in regards to the use of serving urine as lures, and then the CWD Preserve Amendment that you heard from earlier, led by Walter Cook. Also, James led an effort on developing the hunting reg concept that you'll hear more about. That has taken a lot of work in which he has led, so look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. We've had a meeting with Ames Plantation managers. You know, that's a large property at the core of this issue, and it's really important that we're aligned in management efforts. And we met with them to explore just that, the potential for aligning management efforts and also research efforts, and trying to figure out what potential exists there in hopes that we can partner well with them. And also having regular meetings with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, where we're laying groundwork for leveraging the Hunters for the Hungry program even more, partnering closer with processors and hunters in the core area. And I'll say that the more I meet with them, the more I realize how much potential there is and opportunities there are to enhance our management efforts along with them, especially with processors. So some next steps is that we're going to be, again, working more with processors, doing some communications planning. We believe that we can develop a more strategic strategy to better inform stakeholders in the affected area and statewide. And then going to do some more information gathering through surveys by the various stakeholders affected by chronic wasting disease in hopes that we can better inform our management. And then doing a lot of planning for the upcoming deer season. As you could imagine, there's going to be a lot of effort by us for many things, especially for providing a service in the form of testing. We're in the process of finalizing the hunting regulations following this meeting. and establishing the dates for mandatory check stations, which we expect to have this fall. And then also a lot of effort on establishing the in-state lab in partnership with the Department of Agriculture and hopefully with the University of Tennessee as well, and to decrease the turnaround time on sampling. And with that, I'd like to invite Jenifer Wisniewski up to share some of the results that we learned from the online poll that was done in conjunction with the CWD public meeting.
Yeah, so we wanted to hear from as many hunters as we possibly could. So especially hunters that hunted in the affected counties. So we emailed everybody that lived in the county that had big game license, everybody that had harvested a deer in those counties, everybody that had harvested a deer during the extended season, and everybody that gave us their information at any public meeting about CWD. And we had 2,200 people take the survey, and half of those people hunted during that extended season in January. So these were really some of the greatest opinions that we could have heard. But 76% of them were very satisfied with how we communicated their testing results, so that was good feedback to hear. And 79% were satisfied with overall CWD communications from the agency, so that was nice to hear. The 68%, which again, this is not a representative sample of all hunters in the state. This is very much the people that are hunting in this area and people that have access to online stuff. But 68% said that CWD will not affect their hunting or it will increase their hunting. And 84% of this group is likely to have their deer tested, whether it is mandatory to have their deer tested or not. So that's a big, huge chunk of these folks that are going to have their deer tested. And really the thing that we want to talk about here is what would motivate people to harvest more deer. And we gave them a laundry list of things. And the top 5 were, number 1, a replacement buck. So if they shot a positive animal, they got to replace it with another buck. And then reimbursement for processing fees for a positive animal. So you shoot something, take it to a processor, then they want to be reimbursed for that somehow, or maybe a voucher to go get another deer processed, something along those lines. Then carcass disposal. There's concerns about carcass disposal. So we as an agency will talk about ways that we can maybe provide some way to help them with carcass disposal. And then they wanted ways to know how they could donate meat, so they can harvest a lot more deer and donate meat. And then the number 5 reason was they wanted antlered deer in Unit L private lands hunt in January, so to be able to harvest antlered deer during that hunt. So that was the number 5 thing, and that was not part of the concept that was presented at the public meeting. But hearing from these hunters, and if that's one of the things that they want to do, gave the folks in the deer management, they decided to add that to the concept that they're presenting today. So I thought that was really great that we heard from hunters, we took all their feedback, and we're incorporating it into what we're presenting to you today. So that's all I had to say.
Yeah, thank you, Jenifer. And I just want to add to that, you know, the chronic wasting disease is very unfortunate that we're dealing with this issue in Tennessee, but I'm certainly proud with how the agency is managing this issue and the commission as well. And I think the results of the online poll show how we've risen to the occasion collectively. Maybe the most important thing in the management of chronic wasting disease is keeping the buy-in of landowners and hunters. And through my interactions at the public meeting and through the results of the online poll, that shows that we're doing a good job with that, and we want to continue focusing there. So just as a thank you to the commission for your support and help in that piece, especially. And so with that, I'll invite James Kelly up to share the concept that was shared at the public meeting, but again has been adjusted just a little bit to account for the feedback that we got via the online poll.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Chairman Gardner. Yes, as Jenifer and Chuck mentioned, I'm going to be sharing what we're referring to as a concept for the hunting regulations in the CWD positive and high-risk counties. And to clarify, a positive CWD county is, as its name implies, is any county that has a positive case or a confirmed case of chronic wasting disease within that county. And a high-risk county is any county that has a positive within 10 miles of the territorial boundaries of that county. So we're going to be talking about this concept for changing the regulations in those counties for this coming hunting season. This was supposed to be our first off year in the new 2-year cycle for season setting, but due to the circumstances, we do want to address the hunting regulations for the CWD affected area this year. And so at this point, it's just a concept, and we've gotten this feedback from a public meeting that we've talked a lot about, and we presented this concept at kind of what we were thinking internally and tested the waters at the public meeting. We did this online poll, and we're going to share this concept with you all today, and it's looking more and more like an agency recommendation, which we'll come back with at the May meeting for your consideration. So as I mentioned, we shared the concept at the public meeting. We did the poll, and I'm going to share with you, first of all, the concept as it was shared at the meeting, and then I'll share how we got to where we are now. So before we do that, I want to start with our objectives. Our fundamental objectives in the face of chronic wasting disease is we want to minimize the prevalence of CWD where it is in the state, and we want to maximize the containment of chronic wasting disease where it is in the state. And so basically we want to keep where it is, and where it is we want to minimize the prevalence of it. And that sub-bullet there you see under maximize containment, this is kind of an enabling objective or sub-objective of that objective of maximizing the containment. So the priority for this year is we need to identify that leading edge of the CWD outbreak. We think we're pretty close to it, but we're not confident that we're quite there yet. And so that's really the focus of year 2 of this CWD management. So those are our fundamental objectives, but we also have some means objectives or important things to consider as we try to accomplish these fundamental objectives, especially as in the context of hunting regulations. Really that kind of give us some sideboards as we develop our recommendation. And those means objectives would be to maximize stakeholder buy-in and participation, not only this year, but for future years, so now and into the future. And in order to do that, we need to maximize the simplicity of the hunting regulations and minimize conflicts with small game hunters, trappers, and landowners. Another means objective is we want to maximize the integration with our deer plan and not just our chronic wasting disease goal. As you know, we have 6 goals. And new commissioners, maybe you don't know, but we just went through a pretty extensive process to develop our 5-year plan for deer management. This is on our website, and I'll also make sure each of you get a copy of this. But it does provide guidance, especially the science and decision-making goals that are very applicable to chronic wasting disease management as well. So those are some things to consider as we develop our approach for hunting regulations in these counties. Just a little more prefacing, just kind of things to keep in mind before I share the concept. It's already in Unit L, which it's called Unit L because it's the regulations there are very liberal. You can shoot 330 antlerless deer already for an adult with a sportsman's license. Theoretically, you could shoot 330 antlerless deer, so the regulations aren't limiting in that area in terms of antlerless harvest. The reason we extended it last year, we extended the season, is because of when we found chronic wasting disease. It was late in December, and we got those 10 initial positives, and we needed to really assess the situation down there, which we were successful in doing with the help of the commissioners, with the hunters, and which was a very successful effort, and we got a lot of great information in a really short amount of time. Also to keep in mind, the hunters that are going to be hunting in that area this year, the feeding and transport restrictions, which Assistant Director Richardson will be sharing about those tomorrow, those will be new for this year as well. So if you're, after you see the concept, if you feel like it's not enough or there's not enough changes, just keep that in mind, that there are other things that are that apply to hunting in these counties that are new for this year. And there is no silver bullet. As Dr. Hatcher mentioned, it's here forever. If there was a silver bullet, that's what we would be recommending. But unfortunately, there's not. There's no cure. Eradication at this time doesn't seem possible. But we are going to do everything we can, and there is an optimal recommendation given our objectives and our unique circumstances. So without further ado, let's get into the concept. And again, this is how it was presented at the public meeting. The positive and high-risk counties would still be Unit L with a few exceptions. And there would be exceptions for the August hunt and then ones that apply to the rest of the season. So that August hunt, which the commission established for the first time last hunting season, which is an archery only, antlered only, private lands only hunt the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in August. So the concept that we're considering would allow, in positive and high-risk counties, allow hunters to use, in addition to archery equipment, to use a muzzleloader and a modern gun. Also during that hunt, they could harvest 2 bucks that would not count against the statewide, season-wide bag limit of 2. They wouldn't count against that, and it would be open on our wildlife management areas as well. And then, so that's for the August hunt, and then during the rest of the season, any buck that comes back positive won't count against your statewide bag. So that's what we're referring to as a replacement buck. And then there is going to be mandatory check station on select weekends. We don't have that quite ironed out yet. We're very close. We're in a lot of discussions with staff from Region 1, and we will have that ironed out for the recommendation in May. But there will be a couple weekends potentially with mandatory check in those counties, and I'll talk more about that momentarily. So this is the concept, and here's some of the benefits that we identified with that concept. It's a small change. Remember, we want to maximize the simplicity or minimize the complexity of the hunting regulations. So a small change is a good thing, and we think it could potentially have a big impact as far as harvest in that area. It's aligned with the best management practices. I got another visual aid here. Got this big document. It's called the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Technical Report on Best Management Practices for Prevention, Surveillance, and Management of Chronic Wasting Disease. So this is our BMP's document for chronic wasting disease, and the concept that we're considering is aligned with those best management practices, and particularly harvesting older age class males or adult males and targeting them. And that August hunt really is kind of, because their testosterone levels aren't up yet, they're much more patternable at that time. Because they can shoot 2 and it doesn't count against their bag limit, they're probably still going to be in bachelor groups. And we're allowing the use of proposing or considering this use of allowing modern gun. So it could potentially target that segment of the population. So there's a good level of alignment there. We thought this would be popular, and the online poll that we've referenced several times indicated that is the case. We asked would this concept shared at the public meeting cause you to harvest more deer? And we had a couple thousand people answer that question, and 70% indicated that this would. The concept being the August hunt and the replacement buck concept. So there seems to be high buy-in with this approach. It fits within our current season framework. So again, going back to the complexity or maximizing simplicity, it's just Unit L with a few exceptions. it keeps hunters hunting, especially this replacement buck. It keeps them hunting and precisely where we need them to. If there turns out that their buck came back positive, without this concept, they probably aren't going to want to go back there. If they do go hunting again, they're going to want to go somewhere else. But with the replacement buck concept, they can go right back to where they were hunting, and that's where we want them to hunt, to remove those positive animals off the landscape. And as Jenifer mentioned, we also, on the poll, asked about these other alternatives, and she talked about this already, and I've got the top 4, and I excluded the one that Jenifer mentioned. The replacement buck was actually number 1, but since that was already in the concept, I went with the next highest. So number 1 on the poll would be reimbursement for processing fees. That's something that would motivate them to harvest more deer. More available options for carcass disposal, option to donate meat at no cost, which there is that option available now with Hunters for the Hungry, and I won't speak a whole lot to that. I'll let Mike Butler with the Federation speak to that if he'd like to, but that was something that there were a lot of people indicated would motivate them to harvest more deer in the area. But the 4th option, this was the first one that was actually a hunting regulation, was to allow antler deer harvest during the unit, I got cut off there. It does say Unit L, private lands hunt in January. And this was something that we were considering anyway because it's already within the season framework. We weren't sure how much additional impact it would have, so that's why we didn't have it in the initial concept. But because we were considering that anyway, and there seemed to be a high level of, 61 or close to 62% of respondents indicated that they were either likely or highly likely to harvest more deer in the affected area if we allowed the harvest of antler deer during the Unit L private lands hunt. And that's a Monday through Friday hunt, just to clarify. So we did amend the concept. So this is as we presented it, and for you to consider and ask questions about today, commissioners, we've added that component to the concept. So before I turn it over to Chairman Gardner, I wanted to go through a series of frequently asked questions that we've had from internally to the public and even some from commissioners. I wanted to very briefly go through those, and then I'll turn it over to Chairman Gardner. Excuse me for one moment. Okay. So why are the mandatory check weekends to be determined? Why don't we know those yet? Well, again, we're very close on having that ironed out. But it's not as straightforward as you might think. We're still finalizing our sampling targets. We're working with the folks at Cornell, the folks that helped us come up with this surveillance plan that led us to detecting it this year. They're helping us develop sampling targets in those counties. And we're working with Region 1 staff, assessing the trade-offs that are associated with having those mandatory weekends on one weekend versus another. However, I want to reassure everyone that every deer will have the opportunity to get sampled, and there will be voluntary check stations, of course, on opening of gun, opening of muzzleloader. There's the processor and taxidermist program, freezers in the area. So there's still going to be lots of opportunity for everyone to get their deer sampled. We're just assessing which weekends we're going to have the mandatory check, because when we go mandatory, we need to have a lot of check stations and have for every hunter to have pretty close access to a manned check station. So we're pretty close, and we'll have that ready for you at the May meeting. So why not increase the antlerless bag limit? As I mentioned previously, it's already extremely liberal. Some of the most liberal antlerless regulations in the country. So as I mentioned, the regulations are not limiting. So that's really why we didn't change it, because we think it would be a negligible gain in harvest, and it wouldn't be the worth of the added complexity. So in this regard, we do want hunters to harvest more antlerless deer, And so that's where education and marketing is going to come in. And so why not allow antlerless harvest during the August hunt? We would do that, except that because it's a little bit of a later rut there would still be some unweaned fawns, which is less than 2 months of age at this time of year in that area. And so due to, some could perceive that negatively, so we decided to avoid that. And why not extend the hunting season again? As I mentioned, we only extended it when we did because of when we found it, and it was really effective tool, and we got the samples that we needed. However, we think we can get that many samples and meet our quotas this year with having the full season at our disposal, knowing that we have chronic wasting disease going into the season. And this will minimize conflicts with small game hunters, trappers, landowners, etc. And again, it reduces the complexity. It fits within, by not extending it, it fits within the Unit L structure. So why didn't we increase the buck bag limit? And when I say that, I'm talking about the 2 bucks season-wide, statewide. Why didn't we just increase that overall for this affected area instead of going with this August hunt in Unit L, private lands hunt, and the replacement buck? Why don't we just increase the buck bag limit? Again, that reduced complexity to fit it with the current season framework, reduce potential conflict. The buck bag limit it can be a very somewhat divisive issue, and a lot of people are passionate about it one way or the other. And not that we're not open to changing that, and it may be appropriate at some point, but we wanted to start with this approach, which is kind of like we changed the buck bag limit, but we didn't have to touch that 2 per year concept. And should the proposed concept not work, we could increment and work on that over time if we don't have the intended impact. So what's the anticipated harvest for the proposed August hunt? Well, we don't really know, but what we do know is that 1,137 antlered deer were taken in the high-risk and positive counties during the open weekend of modern gun season last year, and maybe we could approach that level of harvest if we had a little bit of cooperation from the weather. We do our job on the marketing end. The opportunity for velvet antlers, 2 bucks that don't count against your bag, allowing firearms, public land availability, should be a pretty big incentive for participation, not only from folks who reside in or normally hunt in that region, but people who live outside of that region or don't normally travel to that area to hunt. So it could have a really big draw, especially if there's some cooperation from the weather. So something we get asked a lot is, what is the target harvest for these counties? We don't really have a set target for harvest at this point. We do want to maximize. We want hunters to shoot as many more as possible, and actually we want the focus to be on the individual, on the hunter themselves, and to educate them or to market to them. And something that we've been discussing is maybe having like a campaign on social media, shoot 2 more, and really get that message out. And it doesn't have to be shoot 2 more, but something like that, and recognize and reward those individuals that do shoot 2 more. So shoot whatever you shot last year, shoot 2 more this year, and see what kind of impact we can have. And the impacts of any regulation changes and marketing efforts will be evaluated, and it's going to improve our ability to predict these types of impacts in the future. So what about the replacement bucks? What's the anticipated impact of that? Well, 15% of the bucks tested in Fayette and Hardeman counties came back positive. So if we extrapolate 15% to what was harvested last year in Fayette and Hardeman counties as far as antlered deer, that's about 450 antlered deer. So that's 450 deer last year that counted against the bag limit that this year wouldn't. So I can't say directly how it'll impact, but also it would add the incentive for testing this replacement buck concept. There might be some who, despite the CDC recommendation, might not get their deer tested, but with this replacement buck concept, this would have that additional incentive. Again, it keeps hunters hunting and where we need them to be hunting. And Chairman Gardner, that's all I've got, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, James. I'm sure there are many questions. We'll start off with Chairman Holbert. I'm sure he's got a few, so we'll start there and proceed on.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner. One question I have is I noticed your proposal or concept would allow WMAs to be hunted on the velvet hunt. What about the Unit L private lands hunt? Why would you not allow WMAs to be hunted that last 5 days and antlerless deer to be harvested on those WMAs during that time?
I think we would be open to that, and it would make it consistent with how we're approaching it in the August hunt. Yeah, I don't think we will be opposed to that. That's not where I thought you were going with that. I thought you were going to mention President's Island, because
I'm not done with my list. Go ahead.
I meant to. I had it in my notes. I skipped over it. President Island. We would not open President's Island. It's a peninsula, so we think we can justify not having the August hunt there because it is such a special opportunity. There's a lot of people waiting to get into that hunt. Been waiting a long time, and we're gonna. We've already started this last year, but we're gonna make an extra effort to make sure we sample as many of those deer that are harvested off President's Island, following up with taxidermists or whatever we need to do. But no, President's Island would be excluded.
Yeah, I didn't even have a question about that, but okay. What percentage? I know you gave the top 5, Jenifer, the top 5 things that would make people want to possibly kill more deer. And you said the velvet hunt was about 70%. So where was it on the list? If it didn't get in the top 5,
Oh, okay. So
how far down was it? That amazes me that many people.
yeah, so
thought
it was a
those
separate.
5 things
It
better.
was a separate question. So the options were really for them to consider were really meant to be considered in addition to the concept. So am I saying that right, Jenifer? Or was
Yes, you're saying that right. And it was the additional things that you had and that were not part of the concept that were included in the survey. So it was things like add a second weekend of hunting in August, extended season through January 31st, higher bag limit of bucks, increased bag limit of antler deer during August hunt. All of those were way down the list as far as ranking.
Yeah. Okay. So this question was separate. So there was a question: would the concept shared, and 70% answered that. And then there was this other question: select these options. Which ones would motivate you to harvest more deer? So that's a good question, but they were separate questions on the survey.
Okay. One final thing. You said we were not raising the buck limit. I don't know how we can say we're not raising the buck limit in any form or fashion, because we are definitely adding 2 bucks to the limit.
Yes. Yes, and Chuck told me that would be a hang up in how we said that. I guess what we were referring to is we didn't, instead of just going season wide, why don't just make it 10 bucks in high risk and positive counties for the year. So instead of doing that, we just had some exceptions for a couple weeks. So yes, we are, duly noted, we are raising the buck limit, but I guess it's not in the same way that we've traditionally thought about. So we have WMAs now that you harvest an antler deer. In select WMAs, there are antler deer that don't count against your statewide bag. So it's that same, we're using that same concept there. So outside of those select dates, so you know, during the archery hunt or gun or muzzleloader, your limit is 2.
Right, but
Unless you
I disagree with that terminology big time. That
yeah, well,
it is a total
we're
of-
open to suggestions on how to present that better. So, but duly noted.
I just don't want the public to be missing.
Understood. Yeah.
Because we're definitely raising the limit if we do that. I had one more, but go ahead.
All right, other questions from anybody on the commission? Kent Woods?
Did we get the incinerators up and running? Or were all these deer that tested positive, how was they disposed of?
The first 30 or so we were disposing of. However, once we got the indication that it was going to be, we were doing house calls, our officers were. However, once we got the indication that it was going to be a lot of positive, as you know, ended up with 186. We started advising as part of our script with the hunters. When we called them, we advised them on disposal, asked them if their household waste went to a lined landfill, and if yes, we just told them to dispose of it in a landfill. Others had access to a lined landfill. Others made arrangements to meet us at one of our check stations, and we coordinated disposal. They just handed it off to us, and then we disposed of it. But several of them, the large majority, were able to just dispose of it in their household trash, double bagged, and it went to a landfill that way.
All right, I'll throw in a question in the middle of this, I guess. And throughout this and throughout even the presentation of Fayette Academy, everything was fairly clear to me, but it seems to me that the CWD zone and the Unit L are used kind of interchangeably through these briefings. For instance, at the end of it, when you said you were going to allow antlered bucks in Unit L, did you mean Unit L or just the CWD zone?
During the Unit L private lands hunt, because the only place you can have that hunt is in Unit L. During that hunt, if it's a positive or high-risk county, you could harvest antlered deer. Everywhere else in Unit L, it would be antlerless only.
Yeah, that wasn't clear on the slide, I don't believe. You can, maybe I misread it, but
Okay.
to me, those two things used in conjunction kind of, one's quite a bit larger area than the other, and I think we at least need to get that more clear.
Oh. One moment.
Or maybe y'all could just straighten me out and then you'd be done.
Yeah, we got a map here. Pardon me. So, yeah, so as you can see here, Unit L is most of the state, the greater than 50%, as you can see there. And then in that southwest corner are your positive and high-risk counties.
So pull up your slide that talked about the private lands hunt in Unit L. Because when you were speaking, I thought you said you were adding the antlered hunt to Unit L.
Was it this slide? Well, maybe we should stick with this slide because this is the concept. So it's positive and high risk counties are Unit L.
Well, regardless of what
Except
slide we're
for-
looking at, I would just like to be clear that the private lands, so I understand it correctly, the private lands antlered hunt is only the CWD zone.
No, it's the private lands hunt. There's currently an antlerless only private lands hunt in January,
Correct.
correct? So that season would still be in play, but if you were in a positive and high-risk county, you could also shoot antlered deer. Just like during the August season,
Okay.
for everywhere else
Yeah.
in Unit L, they're using a bow, archery equipment.
Right, and so that's a great example of why this is confusing, because we just said the same thing. But I'm just saying that when we present it to the public, if we could clarify CWD versus Unit L a little better somehow, it would just make more sense. I know when I read it, it was confusing. Even at Fayette Academy, I found it a little bit confusing between the two.
Yeah, and there's a couple reasons for that. Remember the deer plan, in our efforts to integrate management with the deer plan, we're working on deer management units right now, and that's one of the first things we're going to be looking at. There's also to be considered is the fluid nature of CWD. It doesn't generally sit still in we want deer management units to be static over time so we can monitor changes. So having those move, every maybe even couple of months, who knows what could happen.
Is your intention to be able, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is your intention to be able to add counties if certain positives come up throughout the season?
Potentially. Having it this way makes it more dynamic in that regard. So if you could tie it to positive and high-risk counties, it's more dynamic in that regard.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And actually, I think that's a great question, Commissioner Gardner, and I don't know where my mouse went. Never mind.
Let me step in just a second. If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify one thing I think I heard a moment ago. Commissioner Holbrook asked the question about the Unit L private lands hunt, and what you've heard described here was not to include public lands or WMAs, and weighing the trade-offs of that, we decided to come forward with this recommendation that excluded WMAs because of the time of year that is and the potential conflicts with small game hunters on those areas. So that was the thinking leading up till now.
All right, Commissioner McLaren?
Yes, I'm just wondering, as we go through the summer here and maybe into the early months of bow season, what happens when we get if we were to get a positive in another county, say Henry County, Clay County? Does that automatically put that county in the CWD zone and enact the new same rules in that county as we've enacted in the original CWD zone, or what is our plan for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It will, if we get a suspect positive sample in a new county, once we get that confirmed, so we double check and go through that process, then per the rule that Chris will share about in just a little bit, it will automatically be considered a positive county, which means that wildlife feeding restrictions would apply and carcass exportation restrictions would apply. However, it doesn't mean that this proposal or concept would apply yet, because at that point we would come to you as the commission to suggest that these apply to those counties as well, but it would not automatically apply until y'all took action.
The only thing automatic would be the feed, the limiting of the feed and the carcass export.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Commissioner Ripley, you proceed.
Would it make any sense at all we know it moves. Would it make any sense at all to create a zone of counties that are now contiguous to the area, to the known area, and increase our harvest in those areas as a preventative measure? I mean, if we know, if the science tells us this disease will move from county or will move geographically. So we picked a block of counties that touch those positive counties. Is there any reason to believe that we could slow the progress of it through that method? Has that
sir.
been considered, or
Yes,
is that?
sir. And if it may not be completely obvious, but that's actually the intent of the high-risk counties, is it's close, but it's not there yet. So that's why we're prescribing these for those high-risk counties. But this does include the positive counties too, because we don't need to let up there because we need to try to decrease prevalence there. So I think we're aligned on what we're doing. It just may not have been abundantly clear yet.
Well, maybe I don't understand what the high-risk counties, can you pull up the map again?
Chuck, if you would, a lot of the new ones might not understand because they weren't here for that, so it would be good to just shortly show.
Yeah, I may
show the
not,
positive
I may not
county-
understand.
the counties that do have
Every
positives.
county that is contiguous, that is touching one of the positive counties, now a high-risk county? Huh? Okay.
All right.
So the red is
The
positive.
answer is no. And
Okay, so why not?
because of the location of the positive in Madison County. So the red county that you see there to the north, that's Madison County. That's the exception.
The northern county
Yes,
that's
sir.
positive.
Yes, sir. That's the one exception to what we're talking about. And the reason why we haven't gone further than Madison County is because the positive was in the very southwest tip of the
Okay.
county.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So what you're implying is that we paint with a broader brush.
I'm asking.
It's a good question. It's a good question.
I guess I didn't realize that in that particular county, it's confined to the southern portion of that county only.
Right, correct.
But if it's going to move, and we can slow the movement across the state, perhaps adding those counties that are contiguous to Madison might make sense.
One thing that we're constantly balancing throughout this is not placing restrictions, not being overly restrictive, and we're trying to be sensitive to that as well, and not restrict counties that aren't affected by CWD yet. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Woods?
Chuck, I know you've told us this before, but once a deer is received at a lab or the parts that they're testing, how long does that process take to prove it positive? How long does that take?
How long is it taking, James? 3, 4 days?
Once it's there, they take and especially if it's a big shipment, they take a day to get it, all of our samples set up. But some of those we get back the next day.
The results?
Some of them, they do about, we're doing about 160 a day. Since and whatever they could accomplish that day, they would send us. But if it's a batch of 700 and your sample's at the bottom of the batch, it could be, up to a week before we get your result back.
Okay. Is
So-
that the place in Kansas that's doing it?
Colorado State.
Huh?
Colorado.
Okay. Well, we had talked about earlier, UT was talking about maybe getting involved about setting up or getting where they could do some testing. Is that still in some kind of process?
Yes, sir. But more importantly, at this point, the Department of Agriculture is going to do the same thing, and probably will be able to do so quicker. So we expect to get the Tennessee Department of Agriculture up and going this next deer season, and potentially the University of Tennessee.
Okay. Will it be in these areas here, the lab?
No, sir. No, sir.
Where I'm going with this is, we're talking about reimbursing somebody for a deer that they have already had processed. That's an expense that I see that we might be able to put that money towards a lab being down in these areas to save us that money for reimbursing somebody for a deer that they had processed because they had to wait to see if it was positive for CWD.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot to consider there. One is it's to be certified to do this type of testing. It takes you have to meet a lot of requirements in order to do that, and it's not something that your typical lab is going to qualify for. So there's only a few institutions in the state that could even get clearance to do that, the Department of Ag and UT being one. So that would be one hurdle, and then the infrastructure cost, personnel cost, it'd be astronomical. So and another challenge is that we can ship the samples to a lab in a day, and the labs do a nice job of getting those turned around quickly. Where I think we can cut down the turnaround time on testing is on our end to make our process more efficient. So I agree in the need to make it quicker. I think the ball's in our court on that.
Well, and to follow up with what I said a while ago, that's another reason I was saying that. I find it hard to believe that all these deer that was tested positive wound up in a landfill somewhere. I just hate to see, if somebody finds out their deer tested positive, and I've done drug my carcass out in the woods somewhere, and me as a hunter, am I going to go back and get that thing after the buzzard's been all over it and bring what's left to a landfill? I'm afraid that we're going to miss the opportunity to capture that carcass and get it disposed of properly if we're not able to process this a little quicker. Just a concern.
Duly noted.
Dr. Hatcher.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm accustomed to controlling disease with livestock behind the fence, so this is tough. This is a big, a big deal here. The best you can hope for, and this is true, is to keep CWD in the southwest counties. You've already lost that. It's gone. It's there forever. And what you're talking about, that where these deer are, the prevalence rate is so high, that whole area is contaminated. So it doesn't matter. You just don't want that carcass to leave that area, or that deer preferably, but it's such a slow-moving disease naturally. Even, the deer are going to go out, they're not going to follow that county line, they're going to go out, but it's so slow moving, you still have a chance to keep it there in southwest. So if you can prevent the illegal movement of the carcasses there, that's a big deal on that. The other thing is, if this were animals behind the fence, what we try to do is depopulate. So whatever you can do to thin the deer in those high prevalence areas is going to help. But you got all kinds of things to dance around, like hunters. Welcome to the world of stakeholders, and because they perceive things differently than the way you might and what might be best. So you'll have to navigate all those things. But you've got a shot at keeping it here if everybody follows the rules, potentially. That's a big if. But we do have every intention of setting up the lab and having it ready for testing at the state lab. We've already got approval by what Chuck is talking about. You have to be approved by USDA, and there's certain you have to have the qualifications, and we've already met that. And I got notification that we've been approved to do that. So we'll offer the testing for y'all, and it's my intent to be at the same rate you're paying now, but the advantage would be you could just drive it up. Ideally, I talked to Tim Cross. There was a remote possibility, maybe the lab in Memphis at UT can run it, but they're probably not apt to because it's not within their wheelhouse right now.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. One more question for you. Do you any projection on what kind of volume you'll be able to handle at your lab once you get up and running?
Well, Chuck had told me the total volume might be 10,000 a year, possibly. Is that right? 10,000 tests?
Well, it's hard. We're not exactly sure what to expect this year, but we did over 5,000 last year. I'd say good chance that we'll double that, so around 10,000.
And there is a real need to have a backup because you need to really have two labs doing it. So ideal case scenario would be the state lab doing it in Nashville and then UT doing it in Knoxville or Memphis if you could get them to do it, which I don't know if you can, because equipment goes down, and that kind of thing. And actually, our lab director said, well, we need to order 2 of everything of the equipment in case something breaks down, and it was just that much more money. We didn't want to do that. So we do want UT to also help with it. That's my position anyhow. And I think that's going to work out in the end, but we'll get up and running up before they will.
Thank you, sir. And Commissioner Sanders, question?
Chuck, I floated this in Memphis. I want to try it again. You made the comment that if an area is tested positive, becomes positive, then you would come back to us with proposals. Is there a reason we can't have proposals that apply if it's a positive zone and eliminate that time delay? I mean, we kind of saw it when it happened so late this year. We had to make we had an emergency called meeting to put things in place. If it's positive, can these things not apply to those and be done with it?
Well, I'm going to have to defer to our legal team, but one thing I want to challenge you to think about under that scenario is timing matters. So just keep that in mind. If it's 2 days before the deer season ends, you may not want to take that action, but you might. So I defer what mechanism would be most appropriate.
But it would still end with the season ever how it's already set up. So if it was 2 days before or 2 weeks before, it would still end just like it's currently set.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, if we needed to change and add like we did this year, add time, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I hate to see us have a positive in another county and then it's a month or week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, when you guys could just implement the plan and move forward without if that's possible. So maybe it's more of a rhetorical statement than a question. But.
It would depend on how we went about doing it. Right now, they have units, like Unit L, that's encompassed in Unit L. You don't have a CWD zone. A proclamation is going to be specific to that geographic area. And if it is, last year when we did the emergency proclamation, we did that because we set a season and we set regulations. We have regulations in place. We're not going to have to go back and do that again. If it shows up in another county, how we address it, if you want to have a special hunt in that county, you're going to have to proclaim it. But you've already got regulations in place that will pull those counties in under that CWD umbrella. It's just how you want to handle it once you find it.
I was thinking that you said you'd have to bring back basically to us to get the same proposals that you're already recommending now for the zone, for the CWD zone. So I guess that's what if it is a CWD positive county, then it becomes part of the zone and we're setting guidelines for that.
You have a rule, you have an emergency rule. Chris is going to present the permanent rule tomorrow during the rulemaking hearing that will extend that rule and make it a permanent rule. That rule sets your regulations, it defines the zones, how that's handled, and if you get a positive, what happens and then it has the feeding part and the transport part.
Correct.
If you find it, it becomes a CWD positive, and it falls under those regulations. Those rules will apply at that point. You won't have to do anything else.
Okay. So basically you're saying, I think what I heard you say is you're addressing what my question has been with whatever we're doing tomorrow.
Yes.
That's easy.
Perfect.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Granberry.
To Commissioner Sanders' point, what would happen if somebody on their own had a deer tested in Middle or East Tennessee and it tested positive and it wasn't a contiguous county like Commissioner Ripley was referring to?
Well, the way we would handle that is upon notification, when we were notified, we would want to follow up to get confirmation of that. And if we were able to do that, then it would be deemed a positive or high-risk county. We'd have to validate it, is what I'm trying to say.
And at that point, our CWD plan goes into effect for that
Even though it's
particular
not
area.
contiguous in that.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Secondly, you talked a lot about incentivizing the antler hunts into the velvet season and into January. Have you ever thought about how you incentivize, antler hunts, how you incentivize antlers as hunts? I mean, because I think he referenced that you could shoot 300 deer.
Right.
As a sportsman, and it seems like you want to harvest as many antlers still as possible.
Yes, sir. We putting a lot of thought in that. One is the marketing component mentioned. One is leveraging Hunters for the Hungry more. The concept of, is there a way to make it, if a deer tests positive, that the hunter not be out the cost of processing that? And I want to go back to that. That's just we saw a good result there in the online poll that showed us that would lead people to harvest more deer. Now, whether the agency can do that and how we would do it, we don't know yet. So we don't have a good answer for that yet. But we're really intrigued by that and would like to create that if it's even a possibility. So just realize that.
All right, and I've got another question. So if we drastically reduce the buck population in the CWD zone and the adjoining counties, what is the incentive to keep people in the woods after that? When that starts to fade out a little bit and the bucks aren't as prevalent, then how are you getting hunters back in the woods once you take the bucks, make them a little more hard to come by?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious what the plan down the road is. I know where we're at and what we're trying to get to, but we can't get hunters to shoot does now. You got a few plans, but not sure how to fund it. And I'm just wondering, if we get that far down the road, how do we retain our hunters at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question and an important one, because our data showed us from last year's efforts that the bucks were twice as likely to have CWD. So this prescription is supported by data and is the right thing to do. So I'm proud to be recommending it. But I think what you're asking is exactly what he's asking, and is that, if there's not as many bucks out there, then what? Well, then it's to motivate folks to focus on antlerless harvest, which would only complement efforts.
I'm just worried about losing enthusiasm for hunting when the possibility of a nice buck is not as available as it once was. Once you reduce that, then you lose a little bit of the allure to go to the woods for quite a few people. Some people will still go out and shoot their does and things like that, but that's just a concern for down the road and for the long-term plan. And I just wondered if it, along with Commissioner Granberry, getting people to shoot does would be huge.
It's a real dilemma. You're exactly right.
Thank you. All right, and last thing, I'd like to ask Mike Butler if you'd talk to or take some questions on this Hunters for the Hungry. I know I particularly have a question, and I'll start off. What is Hunters for the Hungry approach to the CWD issue, and how are they, what are they doing to prevent sending their food out? Are they getting every deer tested? What is the cost associated? Who's bearing that cost? That kind of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Butler, Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I'll start with, when we got the call in December that it hit, as a program that provides venison to feed needy families across the state, it was a gut punch, to say the least. And so we moved very quickly to make sure that every animal was tested coming into the program this past year. And that is our intent for all of our donated deer in the zone, coming from the zone, to be tested. Every deer will be tested before it goes into the program. Now, what we've been talking, and I want to brag on Joe and Chuck and the team, and especially the Region 1 team. They've been great to work with. We've had some highly productive conversations. The reality is the extra month of the season added 27% increase in the donated number of deer to Hunters for the Hungry. Now, when you're talking raw numbers, that's like 546 whole deer in an 8-county region. We're going into this season expecting that to at least double. So what does that look like in terms of dollars? That's $60,000 that we've got to go find to raise. And we're committed to doing that. What we're talking with the agency about, and some of the things that make this a really critical partnership, is that we need the help on the testing side. Now, here's the good news. The deer that are donated to Hunters for the Hungry match the profile that the agency is wanting to sample for chronic wasting disease. So roughly 70% of the deer that we receive donated to the program are bucks, and of those, there's a pretty good proportion that are older bucks. So if the agency is going to be testing several thousand deer, what we're trying to work out is the logistics of how do we align that so that the testing, you're already going to be spending the money on testing for your own sampling purposes. And we have, say, 5 processors, 6 processors in the zone maybe. And if we can align that, then we raise the money. We think that every deer being tested, well, we know that every deer being tested that comes back negative will go back into the program and be sent out to feed. So we're committed to providing that outlet. It's just going to take some work and a lot of coordination and commitment.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have a question concerning Hunters for the Hungry that Mike could address for you right now? Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to add, yes, sir.
Could you share some information on how to contribute to your organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we can. The one thing that I will mention in addition to that is that a big part of the challenge, and we have a meeting set up, the agency and our staff are having a meeting with several of our processors from the zone, because the processors have to be comfortable with this. I just wanted the commission to know that we're going to let them tell us, how does this work for you, and then back into the solution from that point, because there are 2 critical pieces that you've heard mentioned. If we don't maintain the processors and help keep them in business throughout this, then hunters will not continue to hunt, because a lot of them don't process their own venison, and we're concerned that they'll stop hunting. The second piece to it is that being able to collect, the processors provide a service of being able to collect all of these deer into one place, which makes it a lot easier on everybody in terms of dealing arguably with waste and different things like that. So that was the last thought that I would share with you.
All right, thank you. And
Yes, sir.
one last thing on the Hunters for the Hungry. I lost my train of thought. I'll ask you later if I think of it again. All right, Chairman, I think that concludes the wildlife business.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gardner. We'll call on Commissioner Stroud.
Leave me alone. Okay. Chair recognizes Tim Churchill. Did you skip the fisheries on purpose?
I went out of order. I would like, before, am I on? Am I on, Jason? Yeah. I would like to say, Danette messed up. Tony Sanders is also on R&R, and I know it had to be Danette's mistake. Anyway, I just want to make that clear. And also, I want to say that the R&R committee, in my opinion, is one of the most important committees, and nobody better than our chairman, Commissioner Stroud, to handle it. So,
Appreciate
okay,
it.
sorry
Thank you.
about that.
Go ahead, Tim.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Stroud. This is, I guess these 2 budget expansions, mine and Jenifer's, are in this because they're a different pot of federal money. Neither of these will have licensed dollars in them. This is hunter education money, basic hunter education money, which is a roll-up program into the Pittman-Robertson fund. So they're related to each other, but they're actually allocated differently by the feds. So this project in particular, the Montgomery County Shooting Complex, is a lot like this one. We helped build Montgomery County Shooting Complex 15, 20 years ago, something like that. We partner with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Foundation to operate that facility. Things are starting to get a little older over there, and they've made a request that we increase our current budget of $50,000 a year to a one-time ask of $130,000 more of federal funds to buy a new HVAC and some trap machines there. And the reason we're bringing it now is we just want to get it done before the end of June if we can. So that is the ask, and I can take any questions about it.
We have any questions from the committee? From the commission? From the public? Now, this will be, if this passes the committee, this is one of those that will go to the budget committee, is that correct?
That's as I understand it this
Okay.
time. This is our new way of doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do I have a motion for this?
I'll make a motion.
All right, so there's a motion, second? Second. Okay, so there's been a motion and a second. Let me get my glasses on. Don't laugh, Brian. For the budget expansion of FY19 for $130,000. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It passes.
Thank you.
Is that it, Tim? You're good? Okay. The chair recognizes Jenifer W. because I refuse. No, we had a conversation about that today, and I changed her name to Smith, and she didn't want to do it.
I married a Polish man. What can I say?
And this is a discussion about budget expansion FY 1921 for $750,000. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, and I'm so excited to be able to present this opportunity for the Wildlife Resources Agency to help fund Learn to Hunt and Learn to Fish classes statewide. So R3, recruitment, retention, and reactivation. It's keeping customers, right? Making customers, keeping customers. But we've got some real challenges in this area right now. The traditional way of you learning from your parents or your dad or your uncle, it's not enough to sustain our sport. Statewide, our numbers are on the decline, and our average age of a hunter or an angler, it's going on up. There are lots of things competing with hunting and fishing, as we all know. I mean, how many of your kids are doing 100 other things than hunting or fishing, from Little League to football to cheerleading, you name it. There's lots of barriers to entry to hunting and to fishing. There's equipment that you have to purchase. There's, hunter ed. There's not knowing where you can go. We've done a lot of programs as an agency in the past, but we don't measure them to see if we're being effective at actually creating a hunter or creating an angler. We've done kids fishing programs and all, taken a lot of kids hunting, but we don't know if we're actually making them into an adult hunter or an adult angler. And a statistic that I think is really astounding. So currently, about 8% of the population hunts. 1 in 20 people born from 1981 to 1996 is a hunter. That would mean in a couple years down the road, 0.5% of the population, not even 1% of the population would be a hunter if we're going to continue on the trajectory that we're on today. So those are some big challenges. But there are lots of opportunities too. So people really are hungry for outdoor adventures. And there's a huge wave of foodies that love to eat local, organic, clean protein, and by golly, you can harvest your own. There's a millennial focus on experiences. With social media and being able to, all your friends kind of judge your life by the experiences that you have, they value more experiences than They do material things now. So instead of going out and buying whatever cool gadget there is, they are spending money on going and having experiences. So going on trips, going camping, going hiking, going biking. And these outdoorsy type of adventurers, those are exactly the target that we need to go after. So we have tons of the outsidesy, outdoorsy people in Tennessee, from kayakers and campers and target shooters. There's lots of people that are sort of very low-hanging fruit that we can say, hey, you are already outside, you're already in these places, you might like to also do this. And we have a community of partners like the Tennessee Wildlife Resource, or the Wildlife Federation, we have the foundation. There's lots of other partners in a community that are willing to help grow hunters and anglers in the population. So, why not look at other states and see what's been successful? That's what we always like to do, right? Take somebody else's success story, tweak it for ourselves, and put it into place. So Texas has been doing this for the longest. They've got a lot of youth hunting programs. They do hundreds of events in a year, and they take thousands of kids hunting and fishing. And they are really the flagship that everybody likes to look at. Their federation helps them and partners with them, with the agency, and they do a great job. They take thousands and thousands. We've got all the statistics. I think last year it was over 2,000 kids that they took hunting for the first time. So that's huge numbers. Kentucky does a specific field to fork program where they go to farmers markets and target those people that are there for meat, and then say, hey, do you know that you can go harvest this meat if you do X, Y, and Z? Illinois has a great learn to hunt program. Georgia, they do hook and learns and do hunt and learns for kids and adults. They have a mentored youth hunting program in New Mexico. And then in Oklahoma, they do hunting one-on-one and hooked on fishing. And so there's, nationwide, there's kind of this movement of R3 and making these programs so that people can try, because they don't have that built-in family relationship of being able to go hunting. So one of our partners, the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, has built this program called the Hunting and Fishing Academy, and it's entering into its 4th year. And they've developed this weekend-long program that teaches somebody from A to Z how to go hunting or fishing. It includes hunter ed. They make sure that their family comes with them if they're under 18. It's a curriculum that's been developed and refined over several years, and so they have built this network of people that are called hunt masters, that are certified teachers that know how to teach people how to go hunting. And they've got all these volunteers and landowners. They've got over 350 volunteers and landowners that are working with their program. And last year, and the couple of years before that, you've reached over 620 youth and parents. And it's a totally scalable model. So my proposal to you is that we expand and enhance their already successful program over the next 3 years. So we'd leverage that already successful program and just make new events and create programs that would target only non-hunting and non-fishing youth, including millennials, which is 20-year-olds, young adults, and families. So, if you're a kid under 18, you're not coming hunting without your parent there, because it's important to train the whole family on how to go hunting and fishing, not just the child. Make the program statewide, so they would have a statewide presence. Use 4-H, Scouts, Lone Oaks, state parks, farmers markets, and other specific places to target participants that are already outdoorsy. And all events would be registered through our license system so that future license purchases could be measured. This is the huge piece of this, because there's not other states that are doing this through the license system, so that you can tie exact license sales back to, okay, in 5 years, we know if a person attended these 2 programs, they were very, very likely to become a license purchaser on down the road. And this would be able to reach thousands of people every year that currently do not hunt or fish. So the total project cost would be about $1.5 million, and the TWRA federal funds would be $750,000 over 3 years. And the non-federal matching funds would be about $738,000, which would come from event registration fees and from the Wildlife Federation. And that's it. Any questions?
Mike, just real quick, I spoke to you about that. The thing I love about this is this Hunt Masters thing that they do in Texas, that they do here. That's right, Mike, right? So what you're doing is you're multiplying the guys, the people that matter, are the ones that can make this thing work.
Yes.
And the invitations and the input and it's a really exciting thing to me because you're sort of plugging into the people that makes this thing expand. You know, it's not just going to run out there and sputter, because you're building this thing called the Hunt Masters, which are these volunteers that gets volunteers that gets volunteers
It's
that
building
gets
a community.
families, and it just sort of snowballs, doesn't it? Really a neat thing. Are there any questions from the committee for Jenifer or Mike? Yes, sir.
Mike, the Learn to Hunt and Learn to Fish program is the one that you currently have, or programs that you currently do, right? How much of that is focuses on fishing versus hunting? I know the Hunt Master program is phenomenal, but how much of that, I'm just not familiar how that's split.
It is more hunting than fishing, but the opportunity to expand into fishing, we do some fishing, but the opportunity to expand into fishing is forthcoming. And here's why. We do a lot, we have other pieces that we do called signature events, where it would be maybe more similar to a fishing rodeo. And those are somewhat feeder that we use to attract, to kind of filter, hey, do you want to go to the next level, which is this intensive 3-day thing. So there's some of those. But the other pieces are taking that model and really boiling it down, because when you do a 3-day weekend event, a lot of times we're tent camping, we're teaching woodsmanship, we're doing a lot of different things, and we want to transfer that into, say, fly fishing. Well, the way that I think we do that is we partner with our fly fishing affiliates, like Middle Tennessee Fly Fishermen and Trout Unlimited. We just haven't gotten to that point.
Because to me, one of the biggest problems with the hunting side of all of it, the program you did with and I don't know which program it fell under, where the kid got the piebald deer last year. You can teach them to hunt, but until you get them in the woods hunting, we're not really, in my opinion, we're not gaining as much. And so that is where I see this effort being very successful with what Jenifer's talking about, what you guys are already doing, is getting them in the woods doing something. And that's one reason I think fishing. I know my grandson had a choice of Chuck E. Cheese's or fishing the other day, and chose fishing. That was a huge win to me for an 8-year-old. And so, you know, having that, you know, once they got that in their hands.
So we call that, when we survey these kids, and some of the purpose of this grant, we'll be able to go longitudinally and look longer, call back to the people who went 3 years ago and ask them, are they still going? 2 things. Texas nailed it when they figured out the parent goes on every trip and they're with the child at all times. They sit in the blind. They do not sit around the fire and drink coffee in the morning. They are engaged. They have to be. We learned from year 2 to 3 that we spend now as much time training the parents as we do the youth, because that's the stickiness piece that we think we're going to see hold forth. Now, the other piece around that is Texas really figured it out around that adult piece, but the effect that we want to find when we do that longitudinal survey is taking somebody that says, hey, I've been hunting or fishing, to saying, I'm a hunter or an angler. When they self-identify, we think that's the point which we win, because then they're hooked.
And I just want to tie it back to a return on investment in dollars.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments from the committee? How about the commission? Anybody? And from the public? Thanks, Mike. Jenifer, you good?
Yep.
Okay, I need a motion on, excuse me. Okay, there's a motion. I need a second. There's a second. And we're going to, this is also going to go to the budget committee, correct? Okay, on the budget expansion of FY 19-21 for $750,000. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Did somebody oppose? Was it just Tony? Okay. So it passes. Chairman, I believe that's my business. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroud. And I skipped over, we're going to go to the Fisheries Management Committee. I skipped over Frank because he tied me fishing this morning. But before I turn over to Chairman Box, I want to recognize, in case he has to sneak out, the Henry County Mayor, Brent Greer. Brent, thank you for being here, and thank you for. All right, thank you. I didn't know we had the city mayor here, so, all right. Thank you both for being here. So, I'm going to turn it over to our Fisheries Committee Chairman, Commissioner Box.
Thank you, Chairman Hobart. Just want to thank y'all. We're excited about being here, and I wanted to thank, even though he picked on Danette, I'm still going to thank Chairman Hobart for arranging the fishing this morning. We had a great day, and thanks to Wade Hendren and Darren Ryder and Lance Ryder for helping this morning. We had a great morning. It didn't rain, and not much, and it was a wonderful day. So I want to thank y'all for doing that. Thank y'all for setting that up.
All right, thank you, Madam
Frank
Chairman,
Fish.
Commissioners.
Frank Fish.
It's been several months since I've given a public presentation on Asian carp, and I think I was here almost a year ago, and there's been a lot's happened since, and some of it I feel is positive news anyway, so I'm looking forward to share this information. Unfortunately, we still have a similar distribution of Asian carp in Tennessee. The Mississippi River has an actively reproducing population, and we have abundant carp in Tennessee River on the Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake on the Cumberland River. But their upstream migration has not changed in 2 years, which is pretty encouraging. And I hope that means that the work that's going on is contributing to that. I don't care how it's happening as long as they don't go upstream anymore, frankly. But we believe that the abundance that we're seeing in the lower reservoirs of Kentucky and Barkley Lakes is predominantly due to immigration through the locks. So that's important to think of as we move forward here with our strategies. There's really only two control strategies in a broad sense that we can work on. That's removing fish from where the carp are in the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, and containing them in those rivers. Don't let any more fish in, and don't let them go upstream. That's our thinking in this. For the removal side, commercial harvest is the most effective tool in our toolbox, and they are working, as you'll see. On the containment side, we have addressed some of the issues of moving fish by anglers, and I'll talk about how we're going to work on navigation locks. So the Commercial Harvest Incentive Program was instituted in September of last year. We're about 6 months in Tennessee. We've provided subsidies for 718,000 pounds of carp to date that were harvested through or purchased through those contractors in Tennessee. And those contractors are the industry as a group, the commercial fisher and the buyers are getting 10 cents a pound for that. We've also purchased gill net materials and provided that to those fishers that are working through that contract. And the program is growing. We've added a third contractor within the last month. So we're up from maybe a half dozen commercial fishermen up to 14 on the list, so to speak. They're not all fishing every week, but it's going up. And Kentucky is having similar experience with this. They're on a different scale. They're over millions of pounds have been removed from Kentucky and Barkley Lake. So we're on track to hit that 4 million pounds coming out of these lower reservoirs that I was talking about in this year. That's really encouraging to me. The commission also passed regulations last fall that were just recently in effect, where people cannot move small bait fish from reservoirs that have had small carp in the past or have some potential to have small carp. Kentucky Lake had small carp in 2015. Therefore, we know it can happen, so that's why this regulation applies to Kentucky Lake. We haven't had fish observed this past year or the year before that were very small. We are asking the public to let us know if they see small fish. This is a little bit like the CWD in that we have actions that we will take if we see certain things happen. If we see small carp in any of our reservoirs, we need to know, because it just changes our calculus on what we're going to do next. And part of that would be to really address the communication effort to say, hey, we got small fish here, don't move them, they're Asian carp. And it also changes our thinking about, is a barrier as useful as it was if fish were spawning up here? So that's why we need to know, and thankfully we have not seen small fish since 2015. We talked about containing carp. The carp barrier is coming to Barkley Lock. That project got derailed a little bit with all the rain in February, but they're making up ground. The TWRA's scientific diving team has scheduled time to go do their work to get the process, the area cleared of mussels, so that the contraption can get put in place. And that's going to happen in late June, early July. And what this system is, I'm learning more about this. I was at a workshop last week where I got to speak with one of the professors that knows a lot about fish and their relationship with sound. And he was describing to me, you know, the carp all the fish are going to hear this sound. The carp just react differently. They have more of a herding mentality, that they run away from it. And that's why we feel this is going to be effective, and it has been effective in some controlled studies. In addition to the sound, there's a bubble curtain that is supposed to help direct fish, and there's even lights associated with it. So we'll be interested to see how this is, but again, this is on the bottom. Boats will be able to go right over it with no opportunity to risk their hull. One of the reasons this apparatus was delayed was because they didn't know that barges can sometimes drag huge trees with them. So they had to re-engineer this thing to withstand the impact of a barge dragging a tree and hitting it. So they had to scale up their engineering. So the state of Kentucky just last week tagged over 100 fish just to be ready to test this system, not only the carp species, but some native fish species. So that project is ongoing. Because we're optimistic about the barriers for carp, a group of states led by Tennessee, and including the TVA and the Corps of Engineers, we got together and talked about what we would do if and when the barrier is successful. Where would we go next? We have to have a strategy on the ground so that if we get the go-ahead and the funding, where would we put them next? Well, of course, we'd have the one at the lock at Barkley. Another concern is to make sure these fish don't move upstream on the Tennessee River. There have yet to be silver carp noted above Gunnersville. And that's been the species that's been the most problem of the four that we've been talking about. That's a second place that we have interest in the Tennessee system is Nickajack, because on the off chance that in the planning process for Gunnersville, we don't get it done fast enough and the fish breach that lock. And also, even if we do get the Gunnersville one in time, we would have a redundant barrier, and that would only improve our protection for the upper river. Next would be to go back and contain the influx into the system. Due to some of the work they're doing at Kentucky Lock right now, it might be a while before we're allowed to work in there. But that's if we could do what we want to do as a planning team, this is where we would put them. And second to the last place is the Tennessee Tom Bigby Waterway, which goes clear to the Gulf. They're not up in that system, and that's another system that needs to be protected. And last but not least is Cordell Hull Dam on the Cumberland system. We've yet to observe any carp above Cordell Hull. So if we got all the money to do this at one time, we would like to put all these in at one time right here to get this problem contained and worked on. There's been a lot of monitoring and research going on to understand what carp are doing. This picture shows Region 1 Fisheries staff, staff from Kentucky, Mississippi, Fish and Wildlife Service, Tennessee Tech. And this team has been working on a lot of projects. One of the big things that we want to understand is how to estimate the abundance of carp. We need to have a repeatable tool so we can say, are there more carp in this lake this year compared to last year? And ideally, are there more carp in Kentucky Lake or Barkley Lake? We still can't neatly answer that question yet, but we're going to work on those tools. We have all these fish that are tagged out in the system that we're tracking. Oh, with the fish that were tagged last week, we're well over 200, probably approaching 300 fish that are at large, and an array to track these fish that goes clear up into Gunnersville. We need to know all about their growth and their survival and their spawning activity, just like any other fish population that we're working on. Particularly want to know if they're spawning. And we're working on experimental gears, not only to have the right gear to estimate carp abundance, but also if we see something that is particularly effective at capturing carp, we would be willing to implement that or through the commercial industry to get more fish out more quickly. The markets for fish have been growing. The problem continues to be not enough fish being caught to provide the buyers of fish. So, and there's been a lot of interest in new gears. Unfortunately, none of them have been successful just yet. Most of this research that we're doing is funded through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Asian Carp Fund, which we've been successful at getting grants for in Tennessee for the last 3 years. And it's a multi-state or federal agency effort in universities. And more work is needed, and that kind of leads me into the next phase of this, which I'm really excited about, has been the work that we have done as a team throughout the Southeast, throughout the Tennessee Valley, really. The War on Carp Coalition was one of the earlier coalitions that kind of got a lot of communication last summer. We helped out on their carp tournament. Since then, we had Bassmaster reach out in conjunction with the Classic to inform people about carp. They even collected some money for us for carp. Carhartt jumped in and sold beanie caps and collected some funding for carp. It's been a really positive effort, successful effort in getting the word out and getting I think the right message to our representatives. One of those efforts was led through the Mississippi Interstate Cooperative Resource Association, or MICRA. They send delegates every year to Washington, D.C. to talk about invasive species and the carp issue. I was lucky enough to go again this year, and we visited several House and Senate offices, particularly the ones on critical committees, and we talked to federal agencies like the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Interior, and some NGOs like the National Marine Manufacturers Association. So we're all getting the message the same, so everyone understands what we need to work on carp. And I can't say enough about the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. They really came in at a critical time and performed a critical role. We needed the strategy and the communication effort that they provided when they did. They started multi-agency carp calls. We had one 2 days ago or yesterday, I don't know. I learned a lot in that. Just every month, we being all the fish chiefs and leaders of different organizations that are involved in carp, and even some of the congressional office staff come on these calls to hear what's going on. That's how elevated this has gotten. And so everyone's hearing the same information, and everyone's able to act on it. The Federation has supported a funding request in providing information in a timely manner and coordinating the ask, so to speak. I'll talk more about that in a minute. They're leading a coalition of Tennessee-based organizations. At this point, they've got a letter that has 86 signatures on it from, organizations such as businesses, the communities, business. I'm lost, looking for chambers. Thank you. That's the one we're looking for. People that know how important this can be are signing on. And I think as a result of all these activities, I can't say which one helped the most, but I know it has helped, because we've been trying to get funding for years, and we've got an additional $600,000 this year through the Senate that was put into the FY19 budget, and that will allow Tennessee to work directly with Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama for the first time over a pot of money instead of sharing it with all the states. There's like 8 of us that share the Ohio River drainage. So it gives us our own piece of pie to work with. And that was led by Mitch McConnell's office. And we also are asking, we're already getting letters of support from the House. We've had 15 members of Congress, including 7 Tennessee congressmen, sign on this letter for FY20. The FY20 federal budget is getting worked on now, and they're already talking about our carp needs in the Mississippi basin, not just Tennessee. So the ask that we're ultimately hoping for, and it's why we've been going to DC for all these years, has been to get full funding for this first bullet here for an aquatic nuisance species plan. That $100,000 will allow every state that has a plan to hire an A&S coordinator and fund it practically. To date, they've not been giving us full funding, so we're asking for full funding for that program, and we're asking the Congress to increase the Fish and Wildlife Service funding from $11 million to $25 million. And we've already written a plan for what we would do with $12 million in the Tennessee Cumberland system. So we are poised with information ready to go to get on the ground when this is approved. And we're really happy to hear that there's, in addition to the Congressman Center I mentioned here, there are members of the Senate that are working on this question right now for the FY20 budget. So it's a pretty optimistic time to be looking for carp funding. And again, just to close out, we haven't seen any huge increase in carp abundance upriver from where they were. So maybe we're holding the line, and maybe we're going to get the resources we need to reduce their numbers. So with that, I'll take any questions. Yes, Commissioner.
Does the bow hunting, bow fishing, for instance, on Reelfoot, that's a big thing now. They're all talking about it over there today. Does that make a difference? Does it make a dent, or is it just?
I'd say bow hunting makes a small dent. We're going to have, I'll mention more about one coming up next week. The most, compared to the efficiency of commercial netting, it's not very efficient, but if it does give us an opportunity to tell people about the problem and get the awareness out there, as I'll mention in this festival that's coming up next week. So.
Any more questions, committee? I've got one. Has Mississippi and Alabama put in place any type of similar bait rules that we passed? That you
Yes.
know of?
Mississippi they modified their bait collection rules right below some of their impoundments, so that in places where it was highly probable that carp might be caught. Mississippi did. I'm not sure if Alabama did or not. They're not as vulnerable right now to that problem because they've only had migrant fish come in, and they're quite large. So both of those, well, they also have state rules about moving live carp, I believe. Both of those states do, but yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Frank. I know you've put a lot of work and effort into this, and I really appreciate everything you've done.
Sure.
I know this is a huge mountain to climb, so
Yep. I think we're
you're doing a great job.
I think we're getting somewhere. So okay, but I just wanted to share this. This Jumpfish Jamboree is next weekend in Benton County. The agency is sponsoring it. We're not running the tournament, but we are sponsoring this event. We'll have a booth there to tell people about carp and to tell them to watch out for small fish for us. So, thank you. Oh, sure.
Are we going to be cooking carp there? And,
No.
It'd be interesting to see what some of the people that actually go shoot them and harvest them think about it, because I'm not sure they always get a chance to do that. I know it's a lot of work.
Well, Benton County explored having people there to show them how to fillet them and maybe even cook them, and I let them. I don't know where they even landed on that. It is a good idea. I just can't be everywhere on it.
Great,
Yep. Thanks.
That concludes the business of fisheries. Budget.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Could get a motion that Frank shows them how to fillet carp while he's there. All right. I'm going to turn it over to our Budget Committee Chairman, Commissioner Sanders, and I want to clarify one thing that he would probably clarify anyway, but the questions during the Budget Committee need to remain only to the money. We've already discussed the project or the proposal. That's already went through the committee, so only questions now should be related to the funding. If you had questions about where the money was coming from. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that so we didn't get off base. So, Mr. Sanders.
You took most of what I'm gonna have to say now.
Sorry.
All right. We have 4 budget expansions been brought to the Budget Committee, 2 out of Wildlife Management and 2 out of Retention and Recruitment. First one is the budget expansion for the fiscal year 20 to 23 Wildlife Migratory Bird Research Project, explained by Jamie. 1.4 million is TWRA's portion, all federal funds. I will take a motion from the committee. Second. Any questions from the committee? I'm at this time not going to open it up to the commission since we'll be having that tomorrow. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Number 2 is fiscal year 1920. It's the Three River WMA Shallow Water Impoundment Project. $450,000 budget expansion on behalf of the agency. Again, all federal funds.
Move to approve.
Have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Any discussions from the Budget Committee? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. All right. We have 2 from Retention and Recruitment. Fiscal year 19, $130,000 Montgomery County Shooting Range Expansion. I'll take a motion from the committee. I'm sorry, $130,000, all federal money as well. Have a first and a second. Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And finally, fiscal year 19 through 21, $750,000 for the, get the wording exactly right here, sorry. Learn to Hunt and Learn to Fish program in conjunction with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. $750,000 is the agency's expansion. Second. Any discussions? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Mr. Chairman, in record time, 4 budget expansions, a lot of money, we're done. It's all yours.
Good deal. He worked. All right. I've got one more thing. I'm gonna call on Joe Benedict to make an introduction.
Well, good afternoon, Commissioners. Well, it's a hot mic. Just wanted to share with you a recent hire we've made in the Wildlife Division here in Region 1. Many of you remember Jim Hamilton, who recently retired. Went through the interview process. We looked at folks inside the agency and outside the agency, and we're proud to share with you, the Commissioners, at his first meeting as a Regional Wildlife Program Manager, Jason Maxedon. Jason's got a long history with the agency, is well known throughout the region and respected among his peers, and I think probably many of you know him as well. So we're happy to introduce Jason. You want to stand up and wave?
I've known Jason a long time, and I won't tell any stories. So everybody here thinks a lot of him, so I'll just leave it like that. Way we can get. Do I hear a motion? We adjourn. We're adjourned.